Welcome to MetaChemistry. We are back with another live Q&A broadcast. We've had some technical difficulties of late that prevented us from being able to release our Krug recap show that we were hoping to put out. So we thought we'd air that live here. We did get an episode out today, and so we should be back on our normal schedule more or less. Maybe a couple kinks to iron out, but I think that the worst is behind us at this point. So joining me today, I have Andrew and Ian, and I'm Devin. And today we want to talk about kind of our overall experiences at the Krug. It's been a little bit now, so we've had plenty of time to forget some of the specific details, but I've also had more
the
time
details.
right? But we've had more time to kind of ruminate on the overall kind of general lessons. And that's kind of what we really want to talk about is partially our experiences, in the games, like how things went, but mostly what did we take away from those things and what really kind of stuck with us and what are the lessons that we got out of it. So with that, I want to give a little bit of context to the event as a whole, and none of this should be new information. I mean, the event happened a little ways ago, but let's see. Andrew, how many people did we end up having at the Krug?
I think it was mid-50s. They originally, when they had booked a hotel prior to COVID, I think they were shooting for upwards of 70 or 80. But and so a bunch of people signed up, but a lot of them had to drop out, understandably, once everything got up and running again. But the venue was new and different. Like if you've got any history with the Krug, it really mirrors its namesake in terms of spirit. Did you get that pun, spirit? Because there's lots of drinking that goes on at the Krug. A lot of drinking and just hedonism in general, debauchery. There is we at Colorado we definitely have a reputation, but this hotel that we stayed at and had the event at was definitely classed us up quite a bit. And I want to quickly give a shout out to Mark and Eric and Shane, our workhorse, who organized the event, and just everybody else who helped participate and make it happen. I really have a great time at the Krug. It's my favorite.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a blast. It was a great venue. There was good food there. Everything felt really put together. I mean, you can tell how much effort everyone put into making this happen. So we definitely appreciate you guys for doing that. But yeah, in terms of just kind of overarching impressions of the event, any kind of standout thoughts just of the overall weekend, Ian?
Well, I want to say that it was well run. It went pretty smooth as far as everything with the organization aspect of it, which was really nice. There was a lot of the community coming together kind of over the last week or so before the event to make sure that like prize support happened and everything else with that. Because unfortunately, a lot of the financial aspects of it got tied up in weird ways with COVID and delays and all that stuff. So didn't look like we were going to have a whole lot of prize support. And then all of a sudden, we had prize support. People were donating stuff. I helped build the painting trophies. There was a bunch of people that, including myself, that painted models for prize support. So that was really cool. Really showing how the community here in Colorado comes together for these events. The other thing that I want to share about the event is that having, this is the first big event, especially specifically in the Four Corners circuit that has followed Salt Lake Showdown, and having attended both of those events, I can say that I feel that the slate that was presented and the players that showed up to the Krug was significantly more competitive than what was in evidence at Salt Lake Showdown. And I thought it was kind of impressive because even though there's about 30 less people, it was a much harder event to place well in because everybody was coming in at that kind of higher tier level of play. So that was pretty cool. One of the things that I did was crunch some of the numbers looking through the rankings, and what I found that was kind of surprising is that there was not a single player in the event that won all 5 games.
Right.
Even
Yeah,
the
pretty
top
notable.
player who took everything is 4 wins and a draw.
That was Rob, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rob
Yep, from
Paul.
Vanilla Combined.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's very unusual when it comes to these big events. You won all 5 of your games at Showdown, right, Andrew?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Exactly. So, it's usually whoever takes top table and takes first place usually wins all 5 of their games. So for there to not be a single player to actually win all 5 games was kind of impressive. It meant that, a lot of the rankings were super neck and neck, coming in through the pairings, and there was a lot of good friendly competition coming out of that, and it was something cool to see and be a part of.
Yeah.
Oh.
So a lot of the diehards making it out, and just an overall stronger strength of schedule, it sounded like.
Yeah. So speaking of diehards who made it out, Devin, you came out to the Krug.
It happened. I
I was
made it.
I was happy to see that. It took a little bit of arm twisting.
Little. Yeah, it was a good time. I really am glad that I went. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I was very prepared for the event. I
Right.
think that
Yeah, tell me about it.
yeah, I was, let's see, I want to say it was less than a week before the event that I ended up registering, and I was writing, I was kind of playing with list ideas up until, I don't know, the day or two before. And I know I'd kind of run some ideas by you guys to kind of make sure that I had some, you know, intelligible lines of thinking going on. But it was a really good time. Like, everybody I played was a blast, and I really enjoyed all of my games there. I didn't necessarily place very high, but
I
it was a
thought you
good
did
time.
pretty good. Didn't you
Uh,
didn't you do pretty good?
it was like 28th or something, so it was like, I think it was dead center. I think it
Uh-huh.
was right smack in the middle. Um, which, yeah, I mean, a lot of that came down to, like Ian was saying, was that because I think everyone was getting kind of knocked down a point. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people were getting really low scoring games, and that's probably just my perspective on it. But because, there was a really strong turnout of really good players, that it was kind of harder to get the edge over somebody in some cases. And I know that most of my games I didn't score very high at all. I ended up, I think I won 3 and lost 2, which, I'm perfectly happy with. I won more than I lost, and I don't tend to make it out to larger events like these, so it was a nice change of pace, and it was good to get a good feeling of kind of what to expect. And, obviously I hear about the events, but actually going is a little bit different, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Could you tease out some of that, just because you're definitely one of the veterans in our meta, and you will go to local tournaments some, but maybe talk through why not the larger events in the past. I know you've gone to Rumble back in the day, and maybe you can speak to, for those who are sitting on the fence around some of these larger events, um, what your takeaway was going to Krug this year.
Yeah, actually, I had forgotten I went to Rumble. That was 6, 7 years ago. It was a while ago.
I remember when I was first getting into Infinity, and people were talking about Rumble, and I had asked you if you had gone. You had said a few years ago you had.
Yeah, that would make sense. But yeah, so I have been once. That was a fair while ago. It was a good time, but it was basically me getting kidnapped and thrown into somebody's trunk, and we were off to the races. But yeah, I think that coming from a lot of war games, tournaments kind of have, I wouldn't go as far as to say a negative connotation to them, but there's kind of this hesitancy from newer players that, oh, okay, well, that's where all of the real tryhards are going to be, and that's where you're going to find all of the those guys and that sort of, borderline or sometimes outright unfriendly behavior. And that wasn't my experience at all. And I've been to a number of local tournaments as well. And I know that that's not a sweeping, example of how all of these events are going to be. And I won't say that I've never had a problem with someone at an event, but by and large, I think that people come out, they want to have a good time, they're there to have fun. I mean, of course, everyone's trying to compete to some level or another, because like we've said before, Infinity is inherently a competitive game. Like, both sides are trying to win, and that's, how the game is played. And I think some newer players can take that the wrong way when you say that, oh yeah, we're playing competitively, that means something like, you're going to play rudely, or you're going to bend rules, or you're going to do this or that. And that's not what it means in the Infinity community. I find that is very untrue, barring a few sparse examples of people. And they don't tend to last terribly long in the community because those sorts of things kind of weed themselves out. Like, people don't want to play with people that aren't fun. Like, as much as we try to, do well and get better, no one wants to play with someone who's going to make you have a bad time. Ultimately, it's a recreational activity, and that sort of behavior just doesn't tend to last long in most of the circles that I'm personally around anyway. So yeah, nothing to be afraid of as far as that goes. It sounds daunting, but it's a lot of fun. And it's a good way to get a rapid fire series of games in. People tend to be fairly dialed in on rules. Not always. Always remember to read the mission. I know there were plenty of times where people were going back, hey, Mark, I need to adjust the score on this mission, or things like that.
Totally.
But by and large, people are there that kind of tend to have at least a better idea of what they're doing. And, they're very, very friendly by and large, as far as I've seen. Like I said, all of my opponents were great to play with.
Now, I got a couple other things as like a preamble to our discussion, just overarching your question about the tournament. The first is, I hit you up because I was making sure you were going, because we needed to represent Colorado. We needed as many. It was home turf.
Right.
Colorado took the best, the top team at Salt Lake Showdown. And me, I am competitive. I want to make sure we do good. So I was like, I wasn't actually going to be able to go. So I was trying to make sure as many of our people were going as possible. And then actually the week before the event, my wife broke her toe. And she was going to be running in the Pikes Peak Ascent, which is like a half marathon straight up Pikes Peak, she's done that before multiple times, and she's training for that and broke her toe. She couldn't go. I was going to go support her on that. So that freed up my weekend to be able to jump in on the Krug. And so I was in a similar boat as you, Devin. I hadn't done any prep. I played 1 or 2 games since Salt Lake Showdown. I hadn't put any lists together or anything, so I ended up doing a vanilla Aleph version of the 2 lists I rocked at Salt Lake Showdown OSS, just to try to like streamline my thought process, like I knew the mechanics of those lists. So, but the other thing I thought I'd throw out is the Utah boys. Like, Ian, do you want to speak to the Utah and what they did and how they shaped our meta at the Krug?
So the Utah players as a group decided that they were going to have a theme, and that theme was tag team. So every or nearly every player from Utah came with a list that had at least 2 tags. Some of them had 3 tags. And this was pretty awesome. Nobody's expecting to face that many tags, so a lot of people didn't build for it. And because of that, the Utah guys did incredibly well with their armored shock tactics, and did so well, in fact, that they tied Colorado for best state, and it came down to a handful of objective points at the end to for us to retain our dominance in this area. But I applaud them. They went very off meta. They went against common wisdom about how the game is played, and it worked well for them because nobody was expecting that.
Yeah, I that makes me wonder, do you guys think that it was because it was off meta, or are just tags even better than we were thinking, or a little bit of both? What do you guys think?
I would say both.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree. I think part of it is that tags are kind of a facet that you can skew into. And obviously that's what happened at the event. And like anything that you skew into, that's going to give you some very potent strengths and some very pronounced weaknesses. And if you don't have something to exploit the weaknesses of those lists, then that's going to leave you in a tight spot. Yeah, I faced 9 tags that weekend. Had quite a few going on. I played 3 Utah players.
They're running 3 each.
Almost. Let's see. So first one was 3, second one was 2, last one was 3. Yeah. And then I played Rob from Maryland, who won the event, and he had a tag in his list. He was running a Sphinx. But yeah, so I faced 2 Blue Wolves, a Guija, 2 Cutters, a Sphinx, a Salamandra, and a pair of Geckos. So yeah, it was a good time. I did win all of my Utah games. Those were the 3 that I won.
Nice. How about you, Ian? How many tags did you end up facing?
A total of 5. I fought an iguana, an avatar, and then a triple tag list with a Sphinx, a Zeodron, and an Overdrawn.
I didn't face any tags that tournament.
You were deprived.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a Marut in one of my lists. I was playing OSS, since I didn't mention it. But yeah, I had a Marut in one of my lists. But yeah, I think we both played our Asura lists into each other when we ran into each other round 3.
Was it 3? I thought it was 4. Round 4.
It might have been 4. Let's see. Let's see. What do we play?
Was it day 1 or day 2?
I'm trying to remember. Now I'm not sure. Let's see. Next I played... No, it was day 1. It was round 3. Because second day I played Rob, and then I played... and I'm so sorry. I forget his name. It was either Michael or Matthew from Utah. So you were on the first day. You were the last round first day for me.
I don't think so. I thought I played Mike Klein my third game.
It was unmasking. So whatever day unmasking was on.
That was day 2, round 4.
It was round 4? Oh, well,
yep.
That shows me.
All right, so let's get into since we're on top of all the details. Should we talk about our games?
Sure. All right, so day 1, round 1, Supremacy. How'd it go?
Yeah, Supremacy was interesting because that was when for me at least the whole tag blitz was revealed, and so I played a white banner list. It was a single combat group with a Guija and a pair of blue wolves, and yeah, it was definitely a low scoring game. That's going to be a theme for most of my games. They tended to be pretty low scoring. Like I ended up eking things out in several of them, but usually not by very many points. But yeah, I had a moderate amount of hacking, enough to kind of push tags out of my zones, either by threat of hacking or by possessing them and moving them elsewhere. Yeah, that was my favorite, was being able to say, no, you can go, why don't you go in your deployment zone instead? Now, possessed you don't count for points for either player, but that's more orders they have to run towards you, at least. But yeah, I think one of the recurring themes that hit me starting in that game was deployment, specifically of the Marut. Like, when there's that much heavy firepower on the table, I have to be a bit more conservative with how I'm deploying the Marut, because she did not survive a single game. I don't know. She survived one of the 3 games I deployed her in. But yeah, I think that was definitely something I had to keep in mind. But yeah, the Proxy Mark II hacker really pulled the game out for me, getting in the zones, killing a blue wolf, possessing a blue wolf, keeping tags out of 1.5 of the zones. It was a good time.
I love that profile.
Yeah, it's real good. Ian, what were you playing?
So I was playing my typical Merovingia, and variation of the list that I had run at Showdown in order to basically almost the same list. I swapped out like 2 things in order to accomplish classifieds for countermeasures. But I was only running the one list for the whole tournament because that's kind of how I roll. And my round 1 was against a Colorado guy, Jimmy. He's very new to the game. So when we got to the table, he was playing Corregidor, and he had his iguana, and he, a bunch of other Corregidor stuff. Some of the missile combat remotes, the nasty ones that have all the stuff.
The
yeah, he had a couple of Vostoks, so he was running a very small list models wise, but it's full of pretty powerful, expensive stuff.
Sure.
But getting to the table and him kind of letting me know where his skill level and experience level was, he, throttled it back, and it was basically a kind of a learning, game. And we didn't even finish the whole game. We played 2 turns, but it was, we just going over things and explaining, okay, this is how this works. This is what your options are, that kind of thing. And, I'm happy to say, I think that he had a better understanding of some of the mechanics at the end of that game than he did coming in.
That guy's a good dude. That, like, he full of enthusiasm and just kind. He's a kind person.
Yeah. And, a lot of props, for being that new to the game and coming out to the biggest tournament in the state to, just get some games in and have fun. So I think, he did fairly well for his experience level, and that was pretty good.
Very nice.
I had a similar situation. I think the guy I played his name was Zach from New Mexico, and he was running Capocalchi. And I think he's played the game a long time, but I think it's been a while since he's played. Like, I think he's been in the game for a bit, but I think it's been some time since he's played. It might have been he's only had a handful of N4 games just due to COVID and whatnot. Right. So I don't have a lot to like unpack from the game. It was supremacy, so I basically wanted to make sure I was going second in that mission because I want to score. It scores at the end of each round, I believe. So I just made sure I was always dominating more zones. So I finished with a 10-0.
Nice. Very cool.
All right. So it was 6-0.
Oh, I think we played 3-2 because I know I was struggling. I held zones the first round. Maybe it was the second. Details are fuzzy. I held one of the rounds and I was able to drop one of the tags, shooting it with a shotgun outside of flamethrower range. And it came down to like the last save before it finally went down. That was against Brandon from Utah. But yeah, it was a tight game for sure.
Yeah.
And then we went to countermeasures for the
round 2 match. Was countermeasures.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of a surprise for everybody because someone decided.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, the red cards.
Yeah, Shane decided it was gonna be hard mode.
He falls into peer pressure very quickly.
Yeah, totally.
One person shouted it, and it was like, "Do it then."
What was your guys' experience? So let's explain that real quick, and I'm curious what your guys' just general take on on that whole thing. Because I know some people got a little salty about it, but I don't know. I had a good experience. I kind of liked playing the red cards, to be honest.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter to me one way or the other which set of cards we play. In fact, I kind of relish the opportunity to play the red cards because only I think it's 3 missions actually have the option to use the red cards, and I think there's a 4th mission that allows you the option to use the full combined red and green deck. But there's very little opportunity to actually use those cards per the mission rules outside of a tournament organizer just saying we're using red for the whole tournament.
For some reason, I thought there was an extra where you could just say it was red cards for the event, but I might.
Yes, that's as I said. Other than a tournament organizer saying it's red cards for the whole deck with that extra, there's only 3 to 4 missions that actually have the option to use red cards within that mission, which again is down to tournament organizer. But
that's fair.
I like trying them out every now and then. They're a pain in the ass, but they are kind of fun because it's that next level of challenge to get those done sometimes.
Yeah, I didn't have particularly strong feelings one way or another. I mean, I can see why someone would be upset by it, especially for someone who is more prepared than I was. So if someone is practicing and anticipating using the green or the easy deck, and then coming in and it getting swapped minutes before dice hit the table, I could see why that would be potentially frustrating.
Yes, I think that the level of card should be announced when the mission is announced.
Ideally.
Before the tournament, just so that people know what they're getting to going in. Having it kind of spring as a surprise, while it doesn't bother me, I could see some people being upset by that.
Maybe not best practices, but
right.
In the long run, I don't know. I will say, I'll just share my game because it kind of reflects on this. I ended up with my second game. I played Randy from Colorado, and as I mentioned, I scored a 10-0 first round. So he probably had torn somebody up in his own right for us to get matched up, and he was running Pano. I think it was Svalheimer.
Sounds about right.
I could see that.
They got access to Locust, right?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
The reason why I bring the reason why I bring that up is because there's been a running conversation locally, especially with Randy, about the relative merits of Locust. I'm not a big fan of them personally. I don't like infiltrating. I know I don't like them. I think that my experience has been anytime I face them, they're just easy to dispatch because I know exactly what they are, where they are, and how to deal with them. So, I'm not a big fan, but Randy goes and over infiltrates 2 for this mission, and he rolls the dice on both of them, scores, sticks both of them, and within 1 or 2 orders for both of them is scoring an objective point. And I said to him after that, I was like, you listen, the next time that you talk about how good Locusts are and I say I don't think they're very good, you have a right to crow just based on that whole encounter. But I will say one of the things that I liked about the game was, and it was because we were using these red cards, is you really had to focus in on scoring the mission to the exclusion of almost everything else. And so in a normal game, my lieutenant's sitting right in front of you, you're going to want to kill it. But the smart play is to ignore my lieutenant and go score that objective, and because you only have so many orders and you got to get across the board, and vice versa. I just thought it changed up the game quite a bit, that it was not a normal game experience. But yeah, I mean, I guess to sum it up is I was able to I actually did pretty well on the cards, and I would have even done better, but my Asura flubbed 2 rolls to score an objective, and she finally got it. But then that meant I was just 2 orders short of being able to redeploy one of my troops into zone of control and do something. And I think I would have scored a 9, and I ended up scoring a 7, I think, to Randy's 3, I think it was, something like that. So, real good, hard-fought game. I thought Randy played really good, the best I've ever experienced him play. So, it was a real good game.
Nice. Yeah, Ian, how did your countermeasures game go?
I got wrecked. So I played Mike Klein from New Mexico, who's a lot of fun to play, and he just wiped the table with me. He beat my ass like 10-0. It was, like the way the cards were coming up, he was just like, bam, he can grab them and just get them done. Versus I was having to work a lot harder to get cards, and then I'm even focusing on stuff, and my war driver needed to get I think it was 3 successes on a whip roll against an HVT.
Brutal.
And I passed 1 out of 7 rolls, and I had no more orders. Yeah, needing a 13. And it was just like that was how that game went, and it was just like, well, fine. So he was playing Aleph OSS, and
did he run an Asura?
He had an Asura that game. He also ran Andromeda. This was actually kind of funny because I infiltrated or no, I didn't infiltrate that up. But I had Mirage 5, so they came in, and he actually, because of the table setup, did not over infiltrate Andromeda, which actually kind of effectively made Andromeda a non-issue in the game. She kind of sat there and didn't really do a whole lot, and then once I got down to I couldn't get any of the objective cards, and I had a few orders left, I just out of spite had the war driver buck some long range shotgun rounds into Andromeda's back and drop her just out of spite. But she actually didn't even really do anything during the game. But like I said, he wiped the table with me, and
he's a really good player.
Yeah. So, what about you, Devin?
So I played Steven from Utah, and he was playing Varuna, so that was the double cutter list. And
nice.
there was still a Fusilier core with a Kamau sniper in it. It does fit.
Oh, wow.
He's not lying.
Brutal.
It was 10 orders. There were 4 Fusiliers, one of which was a medic, a machinist with a Palbot, 2 Fugazis, and a pair of cutters. And I just felt like my army was one of those, at a carnival shooting galleries where you plink the targets as they go across, because that's what was happening. And I won, he kind of went in knowing that he was going to have some difficulty, I think, because you kind of need things to deal with objectives, and it was basically
he had a lot of guns.
It was 2 line troops in his deployment zone that could do it, and then the tags maybe, but since they're all classifieds, most of the time you can't do them with your tags. So even having the specialist troop remote pilots, it's not going to cut it. So he was perfectly content to just shoot me off the table. So I got 1 card. I forget which one it was, and we were going through cards very slowly. I think that was the only card scored, and that's why I ended up pulling it out just barely. A big part of it was that there was a lane of fire that neither of us had really noticed until he started sweeping around one side with one of the cutters. And at one point, he's moving across, trying to get back to some of my orders, and looks down at the table. It's like, I can see your Asura there. And I look back, and I'm like, yep, looks that way. And so he just threw a volley of multi-HMG fire her way out of cover, and she was picked up in an order. And that kind of tanks my plan, because I needed her for the white noise so that I could move past. That's the only reason I got the card first turn, was I was able to white noise in front of the Kamau because everyone else was sitting prone. But yeah, losing my white noise to circumvent the Kamau, and
Plus, the Asura is just so good at doing all the classifieds.
Yeah, she can do just a crap ton of them. Like, I want to say, I'm not as sure about the red deck because I know there are some that are different and like slightly different things that are required, I think. But generally speaking, I want to say that she can do somewhere in the ballpark of 15 of them almost.
Yeah. So yeah, all the classifieds are the same. They're just you have to do whatever it is one more time, or you take 1 degree more difficulty. So it's either, you gotta do 2 pushes instead of 1, or you still gotta do 1, but it's at a -3 instead of flat.
Sure. Yeah, so she can deal with a lot of those, and that's definitely why I have her in those kind of missions. It's like, she just can do so many of them. But yeah, losing her took a lot of my scoring capability out of the game. It put me in Lost Lieutenant for my next turn, which basically meant I wasn't scoring anything, and then that was another turn for him to start plinking away at things. It was still a lot of fun. Like, it was pretty crazy, because one of the cutters was revealed just as kind of a roadblock to make sure that, if I recall, it was to keep the heads down on some of my guys. I think he put it in suppressive fire. But yeah, there was another cutter that was kind of hanging around, and we both knew it was there. It was just a matter of where it was. But yeah, I think that one's just kind of paying more attention to some of those lanes and doing better spot checks at the table and things like that are easy to get lost in the mix. But yeah, let's see. How are we doing on time? Not too bad, but we'll
20 minutes.
Yeah, so let's try and shorten some of these a little bit. I know that.
Oh no, I want to sit on my next one. I want to talk about my next one.
Oh, okay.
I was quick with my 2.
That's fair. I'm long-winded. I know it.
Yep.
That's why I wait until
let's
after
get moving
the
then.
Story.
Round 3, front line, go.
Front line.
Okay, I want to talk about mine. So I ended up facing off with Mike Klein, who had just played in the round before, and going into this match, I didn't know who Mike Klein was, but he has a long history with the game. He actually said he used to do a podcast, and so when we were talking, he was like, he listens to our podcast. He's like, "Hey, what's that like going into a tournament when people know what you're likely bringing?" Because essentially, when I told him, I ran the Marut list that a version of the Marut list that I kind of ran at Salt Lake Showdown, so he kind of knew exactly all that it's designed to do. It's really geared towards going first and punching hard, and it can really counter deploy even when going first. And yeah, he knew. I mean, he's a smart player. He would have anticipated a lot of the things anyways, but he knew it right off the bat. So Mike Klein's from New Mexico. I think he originally said he was from New York. And he was running OSS. So I felt actually pretty good because I was going up against a faction I know backwards and forwards, and I could identify all the threats. But the same is true for him. He knew all my threats and knew basically my list. So there's no surprising him really. And I will say, going into that game, I've got 2 wins under my belt. I'm setting myself up for, if I can get through the first day with 3 wins, I'm feeling good about where I'm sitting at the tournament. I didn't prepare and play for this tournament, but I still, once I decided to go, I'm like, I'm going to try to win. If I can win Salt Lake Showdown and then Krug back to back, that would feel like a big scalp for me and also help our team. And so I was definitely feeling a desire to let's do this. And frankly, the first turn, it goes pretty good for me. I put a lot of pressure on him. I identify pretty quickly. I'm able to take apart a good chunk of his link. I won't get into the details of how I did that, but I realized with all those remotes, the engineer was camped out right in the middle of all of them. That all that work that I had done of putting down his missile bot and putting down his sniper and putting down a couple dakinis and whatnot, all that goes away if he raises them back with the engineer. So when you play OSS, you really want to target their engineer and get that off the board as quick as you can. It takes them from being a very resilient faction to a pretty fragile one on the spot. So I find a lane to get my Marut into a position where it can shoot at the engineer, and I vault up and then drop back down with the anticipation that will take the engineer off the board. But the engineer tanks all the saves. I hit it twice and he tanks both of them. So I have to do it again, and I'm running out of orders. And I'm like, what do I do? I gotta put that engineer down. But so I vault back up. I shoot the engineer. I do take it off the board. I feel good about that. But that was basically, I did vault back down and I couldn't get away. And so I felt a little bit exposed because I knew Dart was nearby. And I'm sitting there going, I even said to Mike, I said, gosh, you know what? That turn went great for me, but I'm feeling pretty exposed. I like to usually redeploy my tag back. And so I think he's like, what do I do? Because I took a lot of his teeth out from him. And he's like, I said, I think Dart's your play. He's like, yep, I think so too. But the good thing about what he did really well was he didn't just lean in with Dart. He eliminated some other threats first. And he set it up in sequence so that he did all the right steps to get there. And he was able to remove some other pieces like my Garuda and some other stuff. And so he runs Dart up, and it actually moves her prone all the way up towards my Marut. And because he has to stay out of line of fire of my heavy rocket launcher. And then he lobs EM grenades at the Marut. And he's got 5 orders to do this. And he spends all 5 orders lobbing EM grenades at the Marut. And the Marut's dodging every time and failing its dodge every time. But he's missing his shot every time until that last order when he hits. And he puts the Marut down into isolated and immobilized. So now I'm in Lost Lieutenant. I got crap. So I actually am able, but net rods are broken, so I've got some regular orders to use because they're veteran, and I run a Monstrucker up and I heal up the Marut. And in doing that, okay, I think my plan for taking out the engineer was justifiable. I think there's an argument to be made that I could have redeployed the Marut and forgot about the engineer, but I think it's understandable that I tried to put that engineer down. But you would think I'd learned my lesson after taking on Dart the first time and failing. But once the Monstrucker raises the Marut back and heals him up, I've still got 4 orders on the Marut that I can use between Impetuous and all this stuff. And rather than redeploying, and honestly, looking back, I'm like, if I had redeployed, I don't know how he wins this game. I was really in the driver's seat across the board, but I thought, I can really put the screws to him and kill Dart. And now what he's going to do? The Marut's sitting in the middle of the table, dominating zones. And so I put 4 orders into the Marut to kill Dart, and Dart wins a face-to-face with EM grenades again and puts the Marut back into isolated and unconscious. And then he goes and in his turn kills my Monstrucker. And so it boils down to my last turn. I do what I can, and I put him into Lost Lieutenant, and I'm dominating some zones. But all he has to do with his last turn is move his own Dart back, backwards, and contest the zone that my Dart was contesting. And he has more points in that, and so he ends up winning 3-2. And he really pulled out a win when I thought I was going to win. I was pretty sure I was going to win. So it really struck me as 2 things. One, just an excellent player on his part, knowing his win condition and playing it out all the way. And then on my part, it harkens back to a critique that Ian, you have shared before, that when I do get myself in trouble, I get over aggressive, and I'm a pressure player, but sometimes I can get over aggressive, and this was one of those times. I think the discretion would have been the better part of valor and would have secured me the win. So with that, I lose my third round, and I'm thinking there's no chance to win this tournament at that point. So that's where my head was.
Sure, totally. Yeah, it's a rough position to be in, and there's a lot of value in hindsight there, I suppose, but lessons for next time. Also,
yeah.
Hi, Nate. Thanks for joining us on our live show. All about the Krug goodness that you weren't able to make.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I can.
Yep.
Okay.
You were with us.
There's other people down here, so I'll probably stay on mute for the most part.
No worries. But yeah, and let's see. So, Ian, do you want to talk a little bit about your frontline game?
Absolutely. So my frontline game was against a New Mexico guy, Jaker. And the key points of my game, there's two of them. And that is that, number one, terrain rules are awesome. There was a thing for the tournament where it was encouraged that most, if not all, tables have some level of terrain rules in effect. There was a little special raffle thing that was going on for people that had terrain rules for their tables. So it was very much encouraged. And the table that we got had terrain rules. In specific, it had mountain terrain. And running Merovingia, I have Briscards, which is one of about 3 units in the game with specifically mountain terrain. So this was kind of extra awesome for me. And my opponent, I've between them and, between the Briscards and a bunch of my other models, I had something like 10 or 11 of my models had either terrain total or mountain terrain. So I was not getting slowed down. I'm zooming around. Briscards also have MSV, so they don't care about the low vis zone for those areas. So that was awesome. But my opponent didn't have anything like that. So he was playing vanilla combined. So it just slowed him down. Second point is that the choice of picking deployment can matter a whole lot. My opponent won the initiative roll, and he chose to take initiative and go first, which left me with deployment, which if I had won the initiative roll on this particular table, I would have picked deployment anyway, so this worked out just fine for me, because the deployment zone I was able to take has a tower on it with a walkway to another tower that's in the center zone that I can move along prone without being seen by anything on the ground. This is important because my opponent is running an avatar, and I do not have the tools to deal with this nonsense. I do not want to deal with this nonsense. I decided that I am not in the mood to play this, so I effectively null deploy and allow him to spend his 3 turns stomping the avatar up and around the table, doing not a whole lot. And he eventually goes and parks the avatar into the far zone, which I could contest, but there was no reason for me to. Okay, here's your 4 points. That's fine. I controlled the center zone for 3. I walked Margot into the far zone for 4, so that puts me at 7. And then a little earlier in the game, because he had a bunch of stuff crammed in his deployment zone, flash pull spots, things like that, I wide-walked Duroc back there, and he managed to get me the Predator classified of killing 2 guys in CC. And then additionally, if you kill 3 guys in CC, which he did, that gets you a second objective point. So the Predator classifiers were 2, so that put me at a 9-4 win, based very heavily on the fact that I got deployment and I picked the table side that allowed me to not play his game against the avatar. So just saying, throwing it out there. Sometimes deployment
matters.
Right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I'll go over. Well, I'll just go real briefly on my frontline game, and then that brings me to a question from one of our patrons. But we'll get back to that in just a sec. I played Rob from Maryland, who ended up taking the event, and it was a good game. He was very aggressive. He was able to put a lot of pressure on very early, and I lost the Marut first round, and he was able to coup de grace, but just barely. I must have discovered that Caliban as it was running up at me. I probably discovered it 4 times, and it kept finding a place to tuck in, recamo, come back, get a little bit more movement, get discovered, tuck away, and like the very last order, it was, maybe one more save would have kept the Marut from falling unconscious, and I would have had a lot more punch in that list otherwise. But yeah, so I was kind of on the back foot from, top of 1 for the rest of the game. And from that point onward, he was really good at putting me in situations that I had to respond to. And, by the time I dig myself out of one of those, his turn comes around and I get into the next pickle. And that was kind of the name of the game for me, where he was very good at keeping me on the back foot the entire way through. And I don't think I scored any points that game. I think that was probably a 0.8 or 0.9 to him. I got a couple licks in at the end with a Garuda that took out a couple things, but it wasn't enough to take back one of the zones, even though I killed probably, I want to say I took down maybe 3 models with the Marut Fort Observer, but yeah, it was some rough going. I had a hard time digging myself out of those things, and I wasn't doing it fast enough, that's for sure. But Ian, your game kind of brings up a good point for Rodka, one of our patrons. One of his questions is, were any of your games affected by terrain rules at the Krug? So sounds like a yes there. I don't think I ran into a whole lot. Like, they were present, but I don't think I really had a lot that was actually not like literal terrain rules. Like, a lot of the tables had some sort of special modifier, like center building is infinite height. That was on one of my tables. Some of them had actual terrain zones, but by and large, as far as actual literal terrain rules from the Infinity rule set, I didn't really run into very much at all. But it sounds like you did it in at least one game. And Andrew, what about you?
I had a game that was mountain terrain and sat zones with trees. But I had a Marut in that game. That was my final game. So the Marut has total terrain. Mm-hmm. So it could actually, I leveraged that skill to take advantage of getting high ground and dominating the board. I'll talk about that with my final game. But so I guess it did come into factor, but in a positive way in terms of having the skill to exploit it.
Yep. Yeah, and I found that, while it's a kind of a contentious topic at times, I found that the terrain rules were actually fairly easy to play with and keep in mind going through the game, and that it was kind of much more of a positive experience than what I was expecting, and it actually put me excited for a lot more terrain rules going forward, which CB has been pushing, as evidenced by the decompression zones in this season and the proposed changes in the ITS 13 season that's coming up, which we will be doing an episode on that as soon as that packet drops this week. So we'll get that recorded and get it out to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, super excited about that. A lot of interesting changes that we won't discuss here, as I was tempted to do it just now, but yeah, so then we moved to round 4, which round 4 was unmasking, as I have been informed during the duration of the show. Ian, why don't you do yours first, because Andrew and I played each other, so that'll be easy.
So my round 4 for unmasking, I played against Josh Nordstrom. He's another one of the Colorado guys. He was playing Toha. And this game was it was an absolute bloodbath. I mean, we just took each other apart, and he ended up beating me 6-5. He got he got my HVT and one of my decoys. I got both of his decoys, but couldn't get his HVT, but I controlled the consoles at the end. So it was a complete bloodbath. But even though I lost because it was 5 or more objective points and within 2 points of my opponent's score, I still got 2 tournament points for that game, which was very important. So that was,
And I think that justifiably, like a 6-5 game, that feels super close and significant. That feels like a significant game.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
that was kind of important though. Even though I took a loss, I still got some tournament points. It still kept me a little higher up in the rankings because of that. But that game, it was just a complete bloodbath. We were just throwing infiltrators and just the nastiest of nasty stuff at each other, and just everything was dying left, right, and center.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, and on that note, that's another one of our patron questions from Rodka as well. How did you feel about the ITS scoring now that we're a year into the new format with how the tournament points are working? Specifically, do you think ties are scored appropriately? Because if you had gotten a tie in that instance, you would have gotten one fewer tournament point than what you actually did.
Potentially, if we'd each gotten 5 or more points, we would have pulled 2, and I wouldn't at the same. So
Sure.
I think that it is scored appropriately, because it means that a loss is worth potentially 2 at most, but you have to be like real close and above 5, versus a tie, which I know it feels weird that you're getting 1 point for that, but you're getting 1 point for that regardless. And then if you're 5 or more, you're getting that second point. Having them valued the same at the end, under those circumstances, I know feels a little weird, but at that point, like, they're very, very similar, and the difference is that it's not necessarily about what you scored; it's about what your opponent scored, because they still got the win on getting 3 points or 4 points depending on their score, versus what you got winning 1 or 2 for taking the loss. But if both players tie, you're getting 1 or 2 depending on what your final score was. So I think that is appropriate, and I do feel that the new scoring system is a lot better than the old one, because it gives a little bit more granularity to the rankings and a little bit more representation of the true skill levels of what's being in play. And because a good player taking a loss from another good player just scoring 0 doesn't necessarily represent their skill level, and they're getting put into the same rankings as players that are just getting curb stomped. And so you end up with a lot of situations where the good player is now in the baby seal pen just clubbing them, versus, okay, we got a couple points. It's going to shake out a little bit more even towards that skill level. And I feel it's important. So, like, Devin, you said that you won 3 games and lost 2. I won 2 games and lost 3, but I ranked higher than you because of my scoring on 2 of my losses were close losses or with points extra, and those 2 losses collectively counted the same points as a win because I had consistently scored at that little bit higher level.
Sure.
And I think that's an interesting thing that shakes out from that.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. I think I'd like to see a little bit more variation there, because I'm kind of generally in the camp that I don't think that a tie, like, I don't think a loss should ever be more than a tie. And it's very specific. Those circumstances that you described, like, that's going to be dependent on a lot of factors. Like, some missions, that is not possible. Some missions, if your opponent is scoring, you are not. And so you can't get within 2 points and over 5 because the mission won't allow it. So that's not going to be an all the time sort of thing. But I agree that it does feel kind of strange and sort of unintuitive for a loss to ever beat a tie. And maybe a way of doing that without changing all of the scoring is maybe allow, defensive or offensive bonus, but not both, or something along those lines. I haven't given it a lot of in-depth thought, but just off the top of my head, that could be a way to kind of shake that out, and that way you could get either of those with a tie and still come out ahead. And if you get both of them, or actually you can't get both on a tie, which is part of the problem.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Hey,
Andrew,
I
any
kind of
thoughts on
like
that?
it. I kind of like it. I think it pushes you to score,
Mhm.
pushes you to be aggressive and score,
Yep.
take risks.
Yep, and that's what I like as well.
You can't play safe. I mean, you can, but you're just not going to score as well. And majors are a little easier to get than they used to be, but I still found that objective point it still helped scoring big wins because objective points ended up being the differentiator more than anything.
Well, and it
So
helps to keep the player that is on the losing side engaged in the game, because if they can just get that one thing, like they're not going to pull the win, but if they can just get that one more objective point and get that close loss and still get a tournament point, or get that, to 5 and still get a tournament point, I think that that's healthy for the game as a whole, to keep that losing player engaged and keeping them trying, as opposed to just giving up and shutting down, which I have seen happen at quite a few games.
Sure. Yeah, that's reasonable. So Andrew, our game of unmasking, we got paired against one another, and I know that you were really bummed when you saw that. Like,
I was totally bummed.
I almost felt bad. Like, you walk up to the table and there's just this dour expression, and it's like, oh, he hates playing me.
No, not at all. Just I'm thinking about Colorado taking the title home. You don't want to pick one of your own off. Either way, you or me winning hurts the other person.
Sure, no, that's fair. But
we made a game of it.
It was a lot of fun. Like, it was a really close game. I think our lists were relatively similar. I mean, they weren't the same. There were quite a few differences, but generally speaking, they were.
I was
kind of in the
running
ballpark.
vanilla. I was running vanilla. You were running OSS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we had an Asura.
Yeah, we had an Asura, and some other stuff. But yeah, I felt like it was pretty similar. And of course, we both have the insight of knowing the other's faction extremely well. And yeah, I think that, like, really when the game was about to end, it was pretty funny. Like, one thing that will probably stick with me for a while is that you had me on the ropes by quite a bit. Like, I managed to hold off on the first turn, and that was good. And I had some decent counterpunch to some of that. But your second turn, I was starting to struggle. And going into your third turn, it said, I feel supremely confident that I'm going to take this game.
Yeah, well, it was all going the way I wanted it, right?
Right.
My whole plan was set it up so that I score at the end. I can flip the buttons. I get to go last, kill the things, and I'm good to go. I had tons of orders. I was like, this is all going right.
Yep.
Until it didn't.
Exactly. It was a wild game. Like, people heard us shouting from 2-3 rows of tables away, because the designated target was the main problem. The Asura came around.
To your credit, first of all, to your credit, you did everything you could to stay in and relevant and give yourself a chance to pull a draw, and maybe even if the gods favored you, get a win. And you left a lot of things up, and you made it as difficult as you could. So it slowed me down from doing all the things that I wanted to do. But then, talk about those last 4 orders or so.
Yeah, I remember the Asura was coming around a corner because you had activated all the consoles, and you had activated them last, which was important. But the designated, I don't think you had killed any of the HVTs yet. So you'd come around to get the designated target first, because that was worth the most points, both for you to score and denying me some points. And the Asura starts attacking the designated target, and the designated target's not going down. She
you're hitting on 17s.
Yep. Yeah. She's getting me out of cover, and rolled a crit dodge the first time. That gave a couple AROs. The next time you had to come forward, she tanked some saves. She passed another dodge, I think, and it came down to the last order. And
Well, the third order, you hit me with a missile.
yeah, the Asura didn't go down.
Yeah, I failed two. I failed two of my 3 saves.
Yeah, like that. It was razor thin.
That was it. That was. I thought I was going to lose right then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that was the deciding point of the game. Between that, there were 2 saves that decided the game. One, that the Asura passed one of those saves with the missile and didn't take any others from that volley. And then the second one, the last order, fired into the HVT. HVT failed or was beaten out or what have you. Took 3 saves, passed 2 of them. If I had passed one more save, the HVT would have lived. So either the Asura going down that previous order, or one more save on the HVT, that would have turned that would have flipped the game. That would have been a win for me instead of a win for you at that point. It was so close. Like watching every single dice roll was going to decide the
sweating.
game, it felt like.
Oh, I was sweating so bad.
It was awesome. Yeah. And that took a lot of attention because at that point, you needed to get the designated target, of course, but that made it so okay. Well, there are no orders to get the other. Yeah,
I had pieces in position. I had set it up so within an order they could have removed the 2 other within. Like I basically odds are 2 orders removes 2 other decoys. Right. But
barring any other freaky stuff going on. But yeah,
so
incredibly close.
So what did it end up? I think I scored a 7 again.
I think it was 7-5 or 7-4, right around there. I'd have to look at the scoring, but it was something like that. And then it would have been like a 6-5 if you hadn't killed the HVT or something close to that. But it would have swapped our placement. Like it was that close.
Yeah,
it was pretty wild. But yeah,
yep,
that's good. But yeah, so let's see. So we've got one more game. Let's try and get through that real quick, and then we'll start to wrap this up now that we're kind of past time. So, Ian, you want to talk about last round?
Yep. Last round is Safe Area. It's the adopted brother of Supremacy, where it scores at the end of the game instead of every round. So for round 5, I ended up playing against Ross from Utah, who's incredibly fun to play against. He was playing Vanilla Combined. He wiped the table with me. Not as bad as what Mike did, but pretty hard. He hit me with the triple tag list, and I do not have the tools to deal with armor. That said, the entire game, as he's beating me up, he is basically cheerleading me the whole time because he's just that kind of guy. And we get down to round 3, because I had gone first, and I'm in retreat. So game's going to end. He's not going to get a third turn, but he stomped me pretty hard. I only have like 4 models left, and they're split into 2 different groups, 3 in one and 1 in the other. And he's controlling 3 of the 4 zones. He is dominating 2 of the consoles, and I'm looking at it and it's just like, well, what do I do? Okay. And then Ian's patented I'm in retreat bullshit kicks in, and I proceed to, with 3 orders, take myself from a 7-1 loss to a 3-1 loss. I had gotten my classified. That was my 1 point. And when I looked down, I said, okay, how do I do this? And the dozer engineer has courage. So I said, oh, he can make attacks. Awesome. So I spend his order, and he moves around the corner and can, I'm under 8 inches, so it's 0 range. My opponent has cover. I need 8s with my rifle, but I want the burst. he had in his last specialist that he had was the tag pilots. So he had dropped the remote pilots out of the tags to dominate those consoles, and I there's just enough of a gap I could see the pilot. So I light him up, drop him. But unfortunately, because that second level of unconscious, I would have to put all 3 rounds into him, and he'd have to fail all 3 saves. And just, that didn't happen. But anyway, it wasn't scoring anymore for the dominating the console. The tag still controlled the zone, but the tag couldn't really do anything because it didn't have a pilot. That's just fine. Spend a command token, flip a Metro order regular, move, spend another command token, flip, I can't remember what other model it was, but it was something, I think it was the tractor mule bot. Flip its order regular, run around the corner, and do the same thing to the other tag pilot, which then allowed me to take him off of all of the consoles. He only controlled the zones, so he only got the 3 points for controlling more zones, and brought me down, a 3-1 loss instead of a 7-1 loss, which still got me a point for a close loss.
Right.
And the moment that I rolled that last burst and he rolled his saves and it dropped that pilot, he looked at me, smiled, and gave me a high five and a hug, and it was just like, it was a cool way to go out on the tournament. Even taking the loss to be able to pull that kind of something out, and having my opponent just being like, dude, that was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was fantastic final game.
Very nice.
Awesome.
Yeah. Andrew, you want to talk about yours a little bit?
Yeah, this is the other game I wanted to talk about. I didn't really care to talk as much about the winning games, though. I learned more from these games where I lose, or this one ended up feeling like a loss. Let me break it down. I'm going into my final game. I'm playing Don from Wyoming, very good player also. He's been on a particular role locally, and I'm looking at him like realizing, hey, as Ian pointed out, everyone was kind of losing, or no one was sweeping through and winning everything. And so I'm looking at the scores and whatnot. I'm like, if I pull out a win, I'm going to finish top 2 for sure. One, either first or second. I don't know which. So I have a chance at this still. So I run my Marut list again in this mission. And like Ian pointed out, similar to Supremacy, safe area, all about zone control, quadrant controls. But the difference is it doesn't score at the end of each round. It's just at the end of the game. So I'm like, this is my chance to go first and hit hard and then hold on at the end. And so that's my plan, and I did. And I just punished Dawn for 2 rounds. Just now, listen, were there opportunities or situations where things were breaking right for me? Sure, there's always a little bit of luck involved, for sure. But my list was designed to do this, and he never, for his first 2 turns, he never was able to even get out of his deployment zone. And by the time he got to his 3rd turn, so my 3rd turn comes up, and I realize, okay, I got to make sure I get into the zones and control some consoles. And so I spent the bulk of my 3rd turn setting up. And Dawn, you could tell he was taking it on the chin, and it wasn't feeling good. But to his credit, the guy kept his head in the game, and he picked his one line of his win condition, his one line of approach, and it went. Well, let me just break it down. So he ends up having 4 orders, an impetuous and an irregular order, plus a lieutenant order. He's down to like 5 troops, and he hasn't moved out of his DZ at all. And I've got the Marut and other things in Overwatch, and it basically goes like this: he moves his crack out impetuously out into a zone and shoots at the Marut. He takes templates from my Liberto and my Marut. If that Krakot goes down, I win the game. But it had no wounding cap, so it saved its 2nd wound and stays up. Then he uses his irregular order on the Kriza, and he moves it out through a building and shoots through a window at my engineer that's prone, my Monstrucker that's prone behind a console. I couldn't see the line, but we called Shane over. Shane ruled that you could see it. So to this day, I don't know, but okay, fine. So he shoots the Kriza. The Kriza shoots the Monstrucker burst 3 because he split his burst. If the Monstrucker doesn't die to the Kriza, I win the game. But it does. He takes it off the board, removing one of my specialists on a console. Then he takes Nauf and spends 2 orders putting shots into the Marut. And he got, and in the meantime, taking a flash pulse from me. He didn't end up getting hit by the flash pulse. And at one point, the flash pulse tried to dodge into a zone, but that's beside the point. If the Marut doesn't go down to Nauf, I win the game. But the Marut goes down. Then he uses a order, brings and with his last 2 orders, he runs a flash pulse bot across a zone into another zone, and realizing he can't get there unless he just takes a free shot from my heavy rocket launcher post-human. I'm hitting on 13s with that shot. I roll a 15. If that flash pulse goes down, I win the game. But he made it. And so someone might look at that story and basically go, look at Andrew's just talking about how unlucky Andrew was, or how lucky Don was. That's not my point. There was luck involved, of course. But my point is, Don picked the one line. He identified his win condition. He could have done a number of different things with those orders, and he was getting beat up the whole entire game. But he took the one line that resulted in him pulling out a draw, and it broke his way. He needed some help with the dice and luck, but this is why this game's a skill game, because of those decisions. And that's what I found impressive about it. It stung. I felt like I lost to end up with a draw with Dawn. And it bumped me down. Instead of, I would have ended up, and hindsight, I would have ended up in second. Instead of finishing second, I ended up finishing 9th, I think. I know. And, yeah, but like in the long run, and we could probably dissect that game even more, but that's what I like about this game. I think I like that it rewards good decision making, and if the things break your way, hats off to you, Don.
Yeah, it sounds like it was pretty crazy close. I got the recap that day from you, and yeah, sounds like it was a really tight game.
It wasn't. It wasn't a tight game. I was killing him.
Yeah.
But not at any point. At any point, it wasn't close until those last 4 orders. Yeah.
Fair. I guess the same could be said of our game in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
And just another one of those things like, okay, well, that could have happened. But
totally.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely a good lesson in terms of, it's good to play games out, especially in a competitive setting, because it's, unless there's a very good reason, it's good to stick out your games, because you don't know what might happen. And playing it through is, it's the best way to go if you can. I mean, there are some circumstances where I think it could be appropriate, especially like if there's something else going, like if you need to leave the event or something, or there's some sort of emergency, of course. But in terms of just kind of average circumstances, if the reason you're thinking of stopping the game is because you don't have a shot at, increasing your score or what have you, play it out. Those are very good lessons for that exact line of thinking.
Yep.
But yeah, and then my game, and I can't remember, and I feel bad because it was Mike or Matt from Utah. And if you've listened to this, please tell me which. I had a great time playing, and I'm so sorry I can't remember which it was. I don't always catch these things as well as I would like to. But yeah, he was playing Vanilla Nomads, and it was a pretty compact list, like several I had faced throughout the tournament, because it was a triple tag list. There was a Sally and a pair of geckos. And I took my Marut list in this one. And basically, a lot of it boiled down to all the resources that he had put into stopping the Marut, but not actually being able to pick her up off the table. He knocked her down first. He went first, and he knocked her down. But standing there inert, I think he put a couple orders into the Marut, 2, maybe 3 orders of shots from the multi-marksman. I think it was the multi-marksman, one of the geckos. And she tanked it. She kept staying there. I think she might have gone down to unconscious 2, but stayed on the table. I had an engineer, within half an order, so I could get there and bring her back up right away. And being able to do that consistently, I probably brought the Marut back up from unconscious 3 times that game. And yeah, she just stuck around, did what she needed to do, drew tons of attention. Like the first order pool basically went into shooting the Marut, because this table. It was a really cool oil refinery table. And I forget exactly who made it. I can picture him, but again, names escape me sometimes. But the center building was infinite height, so it kind of cut off forces a little bit. So there was the gecko.
That was Jordan's table.
Jordan. I knew there was a J, but I wasn't going to try it. I'm already feeling bad about my opponent for round 5, so I was going to leave that one. But yeah, thank you, Jordan. That was a super sweet table. But yeah, it was infinitely tall in the center, and so that kind of bisected our forces. So I put the Marut on the as a reserve on the side with the one gecko instead of the other with the gecko and the Sally. And yeah, first order pool was basically all the gecko firing into her, knocking her down eventually, and then not being able to pick her up off the table. And then did a little bit of damage control. I ended up taking down the gecko and maybe 1 or 2 other things. And then his second turn was basically running Moran's up and white noising and spending a bunch of orders trying to get a Morlock up to go CC the Marut, but didn't quite make it there. I ended up... it wasn't going to drop the Marut anyway, I don't think. Or actually, it was possible if there was a critical hit and I failed all the saves, because this was the DA Morlock, not the EM Morlock, which would have been a very different story. But yeah, so it was down to like the last order of the turn, and he was running up to the Marut, and the Marut did a point blank multi-HMG blast and picked up the Morlock on a critical. And so that was his second turn that didn't feel like it had accomplished very much, because it was all of this setup to try and get something into the Marut to pick her up, and it just didn't really happen. And then that's when I started to really advance at that point. I put I got the Marut up to 2 wounds at that stage, moved her around, and then I started sweeping things up, and Andromeda was able to get down and knock out the Salamandra, and and then things started to go downhill for the Nomads at that point. And yeah, I ended up, that one was my highest scoring game, because like I said, I got a lot of low scoring games just because they were all really close and we were both kind of scraping by for points most of the games. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed playing, and that's true of everyone I played. Like it was a really good event. Like I have had some poor experiences in tournaments with other games, and once or twice with Infinity in other arenas. So I don't tend to make it out. That's not the only reason. There are a lot of other kind of real life reasons that I don't always get to make it. But it was a good time. I really enjoyed it. I think that it was a good turnout. Like Ian had said, it was a really strong showing, a lot of really good players really bringing their A game, and it showed. And, the organizers did a great job managing the chaos, and yeah, I definitely want to make it out next year. But yeah,
and hope everyone else can too.
Right? Yeah, hopefully, the world starts improving a little bit and that becomes more feasible for people, but fingers crossed until then. But yeah, any sort of final lessons or things that kind of stood out to you about the event, or any remaining pearls of wisdom to let the audience know? Ian, you want to start?
Sure. It's important thing with these events is just to try to have fun. Do your best in your games, but try to have fun, and you usually will. Another thing with that is that you only get better from trying and from playing the game. So I really applaud all of the newer players that did come out to the event and got their 5 games in and got to learn some stuff. So, if you are new to Infinity or whatever, just there's a local tournament, whatever, go play. Get your games in. Experience is the only thing that's going to make you better. One other thing I do want to mention, though, is that the Arizona Armageddon is coming up in the, I believe it's November 6th and 7th, that first
Sounds
weekend
right.
in November, I believe. So there may still be spaces available. If you're interested in going, it's probably going to be a pretty cool event. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it. I don't know if anybody else from our group is going to be able to make it, but if you get
I might try.
you better do it then.
I'm going to try. So I haven't bought the tickets or any of that stuff, but that would be my signing off too. Is Colorado's taken home the last 2 tournaments as a team. It would be sweet to pull a third one here. So there's a few of us talking. I know some of the guys are going. I'm going to try.
Yeah, I really want to go, but other things popped up and I won't be able to make it.
Yeah.
Very nice. Well, Andrew, any final thoughts
that
you have?
That was mine. That was my final thought.
Okay.
Was like,
sounds good.
We're coming for you, Arizona.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people tend to conflate competitive with not fun. And I know I've talked about this a number of times, but it's definitely not the case. It can be for some people, but by and large, that's not the case. And I think that is probably the biggest deterrent, or at least a deterrent that I personally have felt in times throughout wargaming and going to events. But it's definitely worth giving a shot. Like I had a blast, and the organizers, they put on a great event. My opponents were great, and you just kind of have to accept that you're going to lose games, because I think that that's sometimes the other deterrent for some people, is that like, oh, well, I don't want to get beat up all weekend or whatever the case is. But like Andrew mentioned, you're going to learn more from the games that you lose, and the more you learn and retain and implement, the better you're going to do in the future. And having a good attitude throughout, it's not always easy for everybody, but the better attitude you have during your games, it's kind of this positive feedback loop. The more fun that you're having, or at the very least, just pretend. If you're really having a bad time, try and just put on a smile and enjoy the game where you can, because you kind of keep doing that. Your opponent will kind of vibe off of that a little bit. They'll end up having more fun, and maybe that pretending to have fun will turn into have fun if you were caught in a position where that's kind of demoralizing otherwise. I think that helps a lot and just makes everybody have a better time. So that's something that makes a big difference at these sort of things. And I know that happened in some instances for people during the event, during my games. And, it's not always fun just, putting wound tokens out and unconscious markers everywhere, but, try and find the fun that you can, because the event as a whole is a really good time. Even if there are moments that you're like, oh, if only I'd just done this or just done that, or, I'd moved this way or activated this trooper, or things that you beat yourself up about during the game. That stuff kind of washes away over time, and what you really remember are the people that you played with, the fun that you had, and the desire to go out next time and do better than you did the time before.
Yep.
So I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this broadcast. This has been Devin.
Andrew.
And Ian. And that's the meta.